Workers support allowing hydrofracking in the state, then oppose it. And the main reason here seems to be jobs. 47% of voters surveyed are in favor of drilling in the Marcellus Shale, while 42% are opposed. And 75% said that they believe fracking would bring more jobs to the state. This is something that the Independent Oil and Gas Association has tried very hard to emphasize, while also seeking to alleviate concerns about the potential environmental impact that fracking might have. Joining me from Buffalo to explain more about these numbers is Dennis Holbrook. He serves on the board of directors for IOGA. He's also a vice president at Norse Energy Company. It is good to see you, Dennis. Thanks for joining us.
It's nice to be here.
So these numbers, do they surprise you at all?
I would say that they encourage me more than anything else. I'm not surprised by the fact that you're finding growing support for oil and gas drilling in New York State. I think a lot of it is a factor that the public is becoming better informed. It's been a slow process, but I think they're becoming better informed, not only on the economic benefits, but first and foremost on the safety of the operation. Because I honestly don't believe that you would find that improving level of support if people weren't comfortable with the fact that this can be done safely.
Yeah, just to also mention to viewers that 51% of upstaters and 52% of suburban counties support, 50% of New York City residents oppose. We should note that the DEC has recommended that the watersheds of New York City and Syracuse actually be off limits to hydrofracking when and if this is approved, and so that might have something to do with these numbers. Can you give us any insight into the timeline that DEC is viewing here, because we're still waiting on that public comment period?
Well, if I could, I'd like to do both. I'd like to give you a perspective on the timeline, which right now I anticipate the DEC readying for public comment, the 60-day public comment period, hopefully very shortly, sometime mid to late August, I think is still what we're anticipating for the commencement of that 60-day time period. I would like to also comment on the statistics on the approvals. I think it's very meaningful that when you use an overall number of 47 to 42% across the state, and you factor in just how large New York State's influence is over any type of polling, I think it's very significant that upstate, and when you then take upstate and look at it from the perspective, take out the areas like New York, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, even Albany, that have the larger population bases, what that tells me is 12% to 17% approval means that a lot of the folks in the areas we're actually talking about drilling, the more rural areas but less populous areas, are overwhelmingly in support of what we're doing.
Yeah, you know, even though we have yet to see a definitive decision, it seems like all signs are pointing to yes at some point. It's just a question of when we get there. And to that end, you see the state comptroller proposing that there's an industry-backed fund just in case there are any environmental accidents, not to say that there would be or wouldn't be, but if there are, to pick up the tab would be something that he thinks you guys should be responsible for. Do you oppose that?
Yeah, I think, quite honestly, that such a proposal is a bit premature. The SGIS process itself isn't even out and complete yet.
Right.
And already we have another proposal for another tax or burden. What a lot of people may not be aware of is New York State already has a tax on production. So taxes are collected right now in New York State to compensate the communities in which we're operating. It's collected locally in the form of a real property tax, but it's based on the production. So you already have compensation going to the local municipalities, the school districts, the counties in which we're operating. Aside from that, we also provide funding for any road damage or other activities that we're engaged in out there. So I'm not sure of the necessity, to be quite honest with you. We're already out there addressing, and if we have an issue related to somebody's water well, we test before we go in. If there is a problem with that water well that relates back to our operation, we already take responsibility for addressing that. So I do think the proposal is a bit premature, and quite honestly, I'm not sure it's even called for.
Yeah, I mean, there's also support in that Quinnipiac poll, 59% for a, quote, new tax on companies. That's a pretty amorphous thing to say, but drilling for natural gas in the state's Marcellus Shale. I mean, there's clearly some appetite on behalf of the public, even if they're supportive, for some insurance, financially speaking, just in case something goes wrong.
You know, what I find ironic is the reference to taxes in New York. I attended a conference a few months ago with the governor of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania has no tax whatsoever on production at the present time, and he is vehemently opposed to it. And his argument is we get so many other benefits in terms of collection of income tax, sales tax, all the related taxes that are collected for the ancillary benefits of stimulating the economy. Why would I want to kill the golden goose? New York, we already have a tax on production, and we're already talking about a comptroller proposing incremental charges. You reference the poll that suggests that people support a tax. I don't know if they said a new tax or whether that poll simply said a tax on production, and the vast majority of those people, I suspect, are probably not aware that we already have a tax on production. I say that because I've had discussions with many of our state representatives who should be aware that we have a tax on production, and they refer often to the fact that we need a tax on production in New York. So I think that in fairness, if people were fully informed of what we're already contributing, and it's a substantial amount of money, they would perhaps be reassured that this industry will pay its fair share.
Dennis, we're almost out of time. I just want to ask you quickly, there was a report not too long ago about a DOT document that raised some concerns about the infrastructure, which is something that we've been focused on here this summer, and whether the roads specifically would be able to handle the increased truck traffic from the industry if, in fact, hydrofracking was approved. I'm not going to get into the back and forth about whether or not the report was true. As an industry expert, are you worried that New York's infrastructure isn't ready for that kind of truck traffic?
What I can tell you is that we've been operating in New York for 25 plus years. We work with the local communities on their roads. Primarily, you're talking about secondary roads, some of the more rural roads that you may be involved with, because that's where the production, the drilling activity actually takes place. But what we've been able to do, and the burden is on us, if we're going out there and we're creating extra load on those roads, we're going back in after the fact and repairing those roads. And the same thing has gone on, to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania. I think Chesapeake's been on record as saying that they have spent literally millions of dollars now on repairing, and often it's reinforcing the roads even before the industry goes on there to make sure that they're capable of handling the load. So no, I'm not concerned about that. I think that's simply a challenge that we have that we're more than equipped to address. And we don't really need a new set of regulations or a new fund to provide for that. We're already addressing that at the present time, and we continue to do so.
Okay, Dennis Holbrook, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Of course, we'll be having you back as this story unfolds. In the meantime, have a good night.
You do the same, and thank you for having me.